last year we saw about 3,000 players enter throughout the cycle. So almost what?
Like a sixth of that essentially in one day.
Yeah.
In one day.
Insane. And Carl, you're fielding phone calls, texts all day long from members of different programs. What was your takeaway?
It was a crazy day. A lot of kids trying to figure out if they go in, will they have a space to go? What's their value going to be? Some guys are looking at NIL money. Some guys are looking at position change, system fit, more playing time, bigger roles. So it's a crazy deal. And so there's some success stories, but there's also some guys that put themselves in some situations that it may not go the way they think that it's going to go.
And you got to be careful. You got to do your research before you decide to enter. Well, let's talk about some of the biggest names that are now looking for a new program, starting with Fentrell Cypress. He is leaving UVA. He's the top-ranked player in the portal, a cornerback. He'll be eligible as a graduate transfer. He just earned second-team All-ACC honors this fall and led the ACC with 14 pass breakups. Chris, what do you know about him?
Yeah, I mean, Fentrell didn't have any interceptions this year, but he did everything but. He was one of the best corners in the country. Really good, decent size, but great makeup speed. Like, he's great on the ball, great ball skills. And he had I think a PFF grade that was higher than almost any other corner in the country. So he's going to be highly sought after. Our own Steve Voltfong reported this morning that Ohio State has reached out. Ohio State definitely has a need at cornerback, and that would be a really interesting fit. Tennessee, Ole Miss, Syracuse have all been on him early, but I expect every DB needy team in the country to be after Fentrell. He's that special of a player.
Fentrell is a guy that can cover the ball well in the deep part of the field, does well in face coverage, closes on the ball, can play press, can play off man. Also, Ohio State is a team that needs corners as well as Alabama. So anybody, like Chris said, that needs big-time help in the defensive secondary, they should be looking at that guy. He's going to have a lot of value.
Yeah, after he signed to UVA, he was graded in the mid-range. He's graded as a 95 now, so we've seen him develop throughout his collegiate career. Now he's looking to develop even further into a first-round draft pick at a championship caliber program. You guys named a few there, so I'm sure he will get to have his pick of the litter there. Let's go to the rumor mill now. Braylon Allen is the first player we want to talk about, a sophomore running back out of Wisconsin. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with a career average of over 6 yards a carry. So surface level, a lot of success there. You wonder why he's leaving. Then someone quickly reminded me, Wisconsin only had 39 red zone drives all season, which ranks 93rd in the country. So a little tough if you're a skill player, right? But Chris, yesterday he tweeted, sources this, sources that. If I didn't tell you, don't say it. I'm going to make you say it. What do you know about him?
Yeah, I mean, Braylon Allen's a really interesting one. This is not a new conversation with Braylon Allen, frankly. This was something that was popping up in November, to the point Braylon was actually asked about it at a media availability, and he said essentially, I'm here as long as Jim Leonard's here. Well, Jim Leonard might still be at Wisconsin as defensive coordinator. I think that search is still in the process of potentially being finalized. I know Luke Fickell would like to keep him, but he's not the head coach. Luke Fickell is. And that's caused more rumors to pop up. This isn't just something that you're seeing on message boards and stuff. Like, this is a legitimate thing. I've heard it from a couple people. I know Wisconsin is fighting hard to keep Braylon Allen. I've definitely heard that. They would love to have him. But he is one of those people a lot of people would love to have. He's one of the most productive rushers in the country. I think a very natural fit would be Michigan. That is a school I've heard quite a bit connected to Braylon Allen if he did decide to go in the portal. So it's just something to track. I've been told by at least one person in the last couple of days that there is something to it. This is not just popping up out of nowhere, even if he's trying to shoot it down with a tweet. So it's just a name to watch over the next couple of days.
In a world where everybody is falling in love with quarterbacks, running the rock is still the best way to win football games, Grace and Chris. And Braylon Allen can run the rock. He would add a tremendous amount of value to any team that was serious about winning a championship. And although Michigan looks like they would need him, I think that he could move any tailback almost in the country out of their spot. If he was to come on their roster, he would be a major improvement, maybe for 98% of the teams that have a running back in college football. unbelievable player. Don't know what he's going to do. Is Jim Leonhard going to stay as the defensive coordinator, which obviously is going to have some influence on his decision? But I would have to think that it's a lot of people who need to fix their defense that would be willing to pay Jim Leonhard quite a bit of money, Chris and Grace, to come on. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. Maybe he can bring Braylon Allen with him, and that'll add some extra money. That would be worth the extra $500,000, I would think, on Jim Leonhard's contract if Braylon Allen joins him as well. You get Jim Leonhard to call the D, you get Braylon Allen to run the rock. It could be special times for somebody who's thinking ahead.
Well, I think there could be a lot of dollars attached to Braylon Allen if he chose to go that direction too. If both of them are in line to get paid for sure.
Right. Run the dang ball. That's the
Run
theme
it.
there. All right, let's look at another player going through the rumor mill, and that's quarterback Sam Hartman from Wake Forest. He has quite a few options here. He could stay at Wake Forest, head to the NFL, or go to another program, but his head coach, Dave Clawson, is supporting him either way. And he had an interesting quote here on the subject of NIL. He says, if there is some incredible offer for him to go to another school and get life-changing money, how could we fault him for that? It's a good problem to have. He's going to have many good options. So that being said, I just want to add some context here, because if he decides to go to the NFL, the average salary for a sixth rounder, which is where he's projected, is in the $650,000 range. Carl, you think he could make more than that?
Absolutely. I think he can make $2 to $3 million for 1 year for a program who feels like they're a quarterback away from winning the championship. But kudos to Dave Clawson. In a world where coaches cry about the system, cry about their players, he's showing he really loves the kid, because he says, if this kid can go get paid, who am I, as a guy who's also gotten paid from this game, to do anything to try to hinder him? I think Dave Clawson is the real hero in this situation for being open-minded and really caring about what's best for Sam Hartman.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been through a lot together, and I mean, I'm sure it helps that Dave has his quarterback of the future already on campus. Eases the transition there. But Sam Hartman would obviously be a super attractive name on the open market. He's been one of the most productive quarterbacks in the ACC the last 2 years. He threw for 3,400 yards this year, completed 63% of his passes. If it wasn't for a really bad week where he turned the ball over an absurd amount of times, he would have been considered one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year. I can see a team like a Florida, which just lost Anthony Richardson, certainly getting involved there. And I think Carl's right. He could easily make more than $600,000, because I think the going rate for quarterbacks right now, especially in a weird situation where we have a lot of guys who might be day 3 picks, you can stay in college and make $1 million rather easily because of NIL. It's changed the equation of whether you enter. And Sam is another one of these guys. Like Bo Nix is a guy that's going to have to make a similar decision. Spencer Sanders is another guy who could probably make more money staying in college than he could going elsewhere. So I think this is just the reality of college football right now, and Sam Hartman's another example.
He owns the program record for most passing yards and most pass touchdowns, which is 107. And by the way, if he decides to play in the Gasparilla Bowl against Mizzou, he could break the ACC all-time passing touchdowns record. So just another thing to keep an eye on there. Let's take a look at another player now who is confirmed in the portal, and that's Jaheem Bell, the star tight end for South Carolina. Really versatile player here. They ended up lining him up as a running back in the final 4 games of the season. But Chris, both of their tight ends are in the portal. Do you know why Bell is looking for greener pastures?
Yeah, Bell and Austin Sogner are both portaled. I think it'll be interesting with Austin. I would keep an eye out on OU, which is actually where he left the first time, so that'll be something interesting to track. Bell's an interesting one. He is somebody who can obviously do a lot of things. He was playing a little running back late in the season as well for them. But he wasn't utilized a ton, especially early in the year, the way we thought he was going to be. I think a lot of us thought he was going to be a breakout All-American candidate. And I think that had in part to do with why he's leaving. Not a great blocker. I think that also had in part to do why he wasn't playing. But he is somebody I think everybody's going to go after. Florida State is the school that was brought up to me, talking to a source that's familiar with how this is going. But I'm sure Florida, Auburn, Georgia, Colorado, maybe even. We'll get in the mix there for Jaheem because he's a very talented player. He's a very unique player, which I'm sure you could attest to, Carl.
Anybody who uses tight ends, and there's a handful of programs that excel at that. Mike Norvell is the guy at Florida State who's really good at how he utilizes the tight end. This is a guy that brings a lot of value. Can play tight end on the line of scrimmage, can flex out, can be used as an H-back, and we saw he played in the backfield a lot. So he brings a lot of value to a multiple offense. And so I think that what he's doing, like Chris said, is looking for a bigger role in somebody's offense. And I think that a championship caliber program will be very glad to have him. He's going to have some NIL opportunities too, but this is a very good football player who is going to have a lot of value to NFL teams in the draft whenever that moment comes that he enters.
You both mentioned FSU. That's got to be huge that Jordan Travis announced yesterday that he'll be returning next year. All right, one more player we want to take a look at, and that is North Carolina cornerback Tony Grimes. Chris, you were so close to breaking this right after we got off air yesterday, but you got it out on social media, the first to do so. This is a former 5-star recruit. He finishes his UNC career with 97 tackles, an interception, 20 passes defense. So, Chris, what do you know about his reasons for leaving?
Yeah, Tony's dad actually told Steve Wiltfong yesterday that this was a decision he made yesterday. But frankly, I've been hearing grumblings about Tony for at least a little bit. That North Carolina defense clearly struggled this year. They were one of the worst in the FBS, but Tony was a bright spot for them. He wasn't perfect, but he was only allowing opposing passers to complete around 50% of their passes against him per PFF. He is still a really talented corner, former 5-star, obviously, a guy that reclassified. So he's really young, even for going into his 4th year of college football. And I think he's going to have interest from everywhere. His dad, Deion Glover, told Steve Wiltfong his priorities are finding the best fit, who can develop him best, and I think that's key because I think Tony wants to go to the league, and that's important to him. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of DB-needy teams. I could see Alabama, which was in the first recruitment, going after him. I could see Ohio State maybe stepping in there because they're already looking at DBs. Basically, any team in the country. South Carolina is another one that I think would be a really interesting fit. Any team that really needs a good DB is going to be after Tony.
All right. Let's take a look at our winners and losers of the first day of the opening of the transfer portal. And I'm going to set this one up with a list of the guys who left. And it's going to be really hard to tell if this is a winner or a loser. But this is who Texas A&M lost to the transfer portal yesterday. Quarterback Haynes King, freshman 5-star cornerback Denver Harris, offensive lineman P.J. Harris, freshman linebacker Ish Harris, former top 50 prospect defensive end Tanmis Adelaide, and one of the country's best kickoff specialists, Kaven Davis. But guys, we are calling Texas A&M a winner. Yeah. So Carl, why is that?
They didn't lose any of their big fish, really from their recruiting class. And it was a much thought about going into the portal that with the way that they played this year, that class was going to blow up and explode on them, and it hasn't yet. And so maybe Coach Fisher holds on to those guys, and if he can hold on to the core group of that recruiting class, then Texas A&M should have a shot to be much improved next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, since you read that off, well, in the last hour, basically, A&M's lost 3 other players to the portal: Marcus Burris, Terrion Lee, and Andre White. But again, these aren't exactly key contributors, and that's the key for A&M being a winner. That 2022 freshman class, that top class of all time, is mostly intact. I know Denver Harris is gone, but he was most likely gone anyway. The same thing with PJ. The same thing with the offensive lineman that left Texas A&M. So keeping everybody together in that regard is huge for Jimbo Fisher's future. And while the numbers look bad, and while this is going to hurt A&M from a depth perspective, at least the core of the team is intact.
And at one point they were riding that 6-game losing streak. So it's just impressive. It goes to show what beating LSU, just one win against, a highly rated team, can do for the momentum.
Absolutely.
So our second winner of the day is Colorado. Obviously, Deion Sanders, your buddy, making headlines all over the place and drawing an unreal amount of interest to his program. Why is Colorado our winner, Carl?
Colorado is a winner because so many of the top players in the country who are going into the transfer portal have an interest in playing for Deion Sanders. They've hit the ground running. He's put together a great staff, win by getting Sean Lewis to leave Kent State to be offensive coordinator, Willie Taggart coming in, a guy with a bunch of experience that's also a great recruiter. Tim Brewster, who's one of the legendary recruiters in all of college football. Anybody affiliated with football recruiting knows who Tim Brewster is. And so right now, they are on fire in terms of the interest level that they're getting at the University of Colorado. He's going to be able to turn that program around quick, fast, in a hurry because of the influx of talent he's going to receive through the transfer portal.
I mean, Colorado's a winner because people are talking about them. They went 1-9 this season. Like, Colorado was an afterthought the last couple of years since they had a really strong season under Carl Durrell in year one during the pandemic, but that I think was more of an aberration looking at what we've seen since. And Colorado's the hottest team in the country right now. Everybody wants to talk about Colorado. Everybody wants to talk about Dion. It feels like we're in the 90s again when Colorado was a powerhouse, and like it hasn't felt that way for a long time. So just Colorado being in the conversation is so big for that brand, and it's all thanks to Deion Sanders.
That's really a prime example of the effect of the modern era transfer portal, just the idea that someone of that position would take that job and then to have the possibility of flipping a roster in 18 months or less. Let's take a look at our losers now. We all know Alabama has been looking for a proven wide receiver for the last few seasons, but they're not gaining any of those. They're losing them. The only one remaining from that highly rated 2021 wide receiver class is Ja'Cory Brooks. So, Carl, what's going on in Tuscaloosa?
They've had some horrible misses at the wide receiver position. Even if you go back to a season ago when they had Jamison Williams, when Jamison got hurt in the national championship game, and when he got ejected in the Auburn game, they looked like they couldn't move the ball through the air at all. So I would say in the last two seasons, outside of Jamison Williams, and then John Mechie played really good also, they really struggled at the receiver position. They have to find help through the transfer portal, through high school recruiting. They need some immediate impact guys at the wide receiver position, and they're on the clock. That's something that's been holding them back offensively the past couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, when that Alabama 2021 class happened, before the Texas A&M thing, it was one of the greatest classes of all time. Mm-hmm. And that wide receiver group was talked about in the same way we talked about that Alabama 2017 class that produced 4 first-round receivers. And Ja'Cory Brooks has been very good. He came on late in the season, but to essentially, I don't want to say bust out in the other 3 because I think they could all be very successful at other places. JoJo Earl is somebody I've always been rather fond of as a Texas guy. But it's just going to be interesting to see how Nick Saban responds to this because this is more aggressive movement than we've ever seen the portal out of Alabama. We can't really consider this processing because, this is more of an exodus. They're losing players I don't think they wanted to lose, and that's very different than what we've ever seen at Alabama before. So Nick Saban's always found a way to adapt. I'm sure he will, but it's a very interesting time for that program.
Yeah, honestly, if anyone can adapt, it's Nick Saban. That's why he's been able to build a dynasty through the last couple decades. Our second loser of opening day is Oklahoma State. The Cowboys have experienced an exodus of players, 11 as it stands right now, including 4-year starting quarterback Spencer Sanders. Chris, what does all of this mean?
Yeah, and then just today they lost Trace Ford, who's one of the better defensive ends in the Big 12. It's been a really rough couple days for Oklahoma State. I've heard that just some players on that team had a little bit of friction in the way things were run on the coaching staff. We saw that. We discussed this yesterday. One of Oklahoma State's freshman receivers called out the coaching staff for not doing their job well, and anytime that's happening, it's not really a good reflection on your program. Mike Gundy is no longer a really young coach. He's not 40 anymore. He is, I wouldn't say stuck in his ways, but he's definitely, I think, described in the coaching industry as less than malleable about how he looks at things. And I don't necessarily think he was trying to convince a lot of these guys to stay. I think he has an attitude that if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be there, which is fine, but we're, as Coach Reed can attest to, talking about a different era of kids, and I think you have to coach a little different. So I think all of that is happening at Oklahoma State at the same time, and anytime you lose a guy like Spencer Sanders, it starts a conversation that we're having right now.
Kids are really pressed right now about how hard you coach them, and so Oklahoma State is a program that has been good consistently over the years because of the grind, and that's hard for some kids to take. That's hard for some guys to be coached that way, to be coached at a high level of energy. A lot of guys will run away from that. It gets old to them fast. And so we're seeing a change in college football when Years ago, if your coach was tough on you, if you didn't like the way things were going, you just had to toughen up a little bit and fight through it. Now, guys are able to say, I don't like the way I'm being talked to. I don't like the way I'm being coached, and I'm going to move on to the next situation.
All right. Well, we all knew this craziness would happen. We've seen a little bit of it play out already with bigger names. There's been a few surprises, but a lot of it is kind of expected too. And there's several reasons that these players are choosing to leave their programs and look for a better fit. So, Carl, I'll start with you. How can the transfer portal process be improved?
What I would like to see with the portal process, Grace, is I would like to see the NCAA put together a committee similar to what the National Football League has done that gives guys draft grades on whether they should go back to school or come out for the draft. But the reason being this, we spent a lot of time the last 2 days talking about the Devin Learys, the Sam Hartmans, the possibility of guys like Drake May or Braylon Allen. But the truth of the matter is that 80% of these kids should stay at the school that they're at, and they're not making a good decision. They're running away from adversity. They're running away from hard work. They're running away from being coached really hard. And most importantly, they're running away from getting their college degree because they're giving up an education. And so many of these kids that jumped in the portal, the vast majority of them are not going to get signed by anybody else. They're going to have to drop down to lower levels and go from full scholarships to partial scholarships. Very few of these kids are going to get NIL money. And the reality has been skewed because they're all chasing something that most of them won't attain. All of the things that benefit kids, the NIL, that's just for the top 10% of players. So you have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, are you in the top 10%? And that's a hard conversation for certain players. But the majority of these kids, the kids that are in the transfer portal right now, should have stayed at the school they're at, and they made a tremendously bad decision by moving on.
Yeah, I mean, just building on top of that, we did a study after the 2019-20 cycle looking at scholarship players in the FBS level, and only 47.2% of P5 scholarship players, 47.25% of P5 scholarship players ended up dropping down to the FCS, not getting signed or going to JUCO. So it was really only like a 50-50 shot, even as a P5 scholarship player, to stay. And a lot of these kids make rash decisions. A lot of them get bad information from people in their families. I agree with Carl. I think a committee like that or some kind of grade would be awesome. As for the process itself, I'm just talking to people around the country. I think transfer portal windows are well-intentioned, but it makes things very difficult for coaching staffs. And I think in a lot of ways, it makes things very difficult for players because with the early signing period coming up in essentially 2.5 weeks, players have to make a decision very quickly. Essentially, you're changing a 2-year process of getting to know people and recruiting and making it a 2.5-week process. That's impossible on everyone, including the players, which are put in a really difficult position. And also building on top of what Carl was saying, I think people need to stress the importance of degrees because we're heading into an era where players are transferring multiple times. And once that COVID eligibility runs out, when people don't get 6 years automatically or 5 years automatically, you're not going to graduate. Like when you transfer credits, you're going to lose them a lot of the times. And if you're transferring twice in your career and you play 4 years straight, you're not going to graduate. So I think players also really need to think about that. I bet we could talk for an hour about what we could change in the portal. But those are all topics that I think are really important to stress.
I just think that the players need to talk to somebody that can give them good advice other than their parents who are being emotional, other than some of the people who, I don't want to be negative to certain groups of people, but you need to go to somebody who knows what they're talking about before you make a decision like that, because most of you are putting yourself in a terrible decision. And that's what I tell 90% of the kids who call me about the transfer portal.
I was going to say, who do you advise them to talk with, or are you the tough guy giving them the truth?
I mean, I'll tell them the truth if they ask me. I'll tell them exactly where they really stand, in the game. My door is always open, my DMs. Most kids in the country have my cell phone number, and talk to somebody, have a conversation with somebody. There's a big time high school coach in every major city that knows all of the college coaches. There's a guy who played at the college level in every town. There's somebody who understands the business. I don't care where you're from. There's somebody there that knows what they're talking about. find out who that person is and reach out to them for advice.
Man, well, there's a lot of things to fix, but one thing, the only constant is change in this industry. So we could be back on this couch next year talking about a whole nother list of problems, or maybe the ones we've been discussing today are all solved, or we never know. But one thing we do know is it's a lot of exciting stuff, and we got you covered on all of it. Don't forget that the College Football Recruiting Show is still going on today. It's every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern. You can see Emily Proud and our whole gang of analysts on that show. So please tune in to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. And remember, the transfer portal window is open until January 18th. So the news is going to keep piling in. And Chris Hummer, Carl Reed, all of our analysts got you covered on all of it. So if you're not subscribed to 247sports.com or our YouTube channel, you really got to get on that. Thanks for watching us here today. I'm Grace Remington for Carl and Chris. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll see y'all soon.